All right, let's take a look at some of the Chapter 9 quiz-like questions. Question 1. And there are a number of questions on the quiz that basically, they don't look exactly like this, but they require you to do the same thing. It's pretty simple. The interest accrued on $6,600 at 8% for 90 days is what? Okay, so if you remember from the lecture, anytime we're trying to figure out how much interest has been earned or accrued, whatever, for a certain time period, we'll take the principal, which in this case is that $6,600, times the interest rate, 8% or 0.08, times whatever portion of a year we're talking about. In this case, remember the banker's rule. Basically, if we calculate the portion of a year using days, we're going to assume the year is a 360-day year just for the sake of making it a little easier to calculate. So 90 out of 360 is 1/4. So we have 6,600 times 0.08 times 1/4 equals $132. So you do need to be pretty comfortable calculating interest like this. Question 2. A company borrowed $30,000 by signing a 180-day promissory note at 5%. What is the maturity value of the note? Well, maturity value means how much is it going to be worth, or what are you going to get when the note matures. So if you loaned out money, you expect to get your money back, and then you also expect interest. So we want to calculate both the interest earned and then add that to the amount of the principal that we're going to be getting back. So the first step, again, just plug that into the formula we were just talking about. Principal 30,000 times 0.05 or 5% times the portion of the year we're dealing with, in this case exactly 1/2 of the banker's rule year of 360, for a total interest earned of $750. Then, like I said, since we're concerned with the maturity value of the note, the overall value, we need to add the principal back in. So at this point, the total value of the note at maturity is $30,750. Question 3. A company factored, which just means sold to a third party, $45,000 of accounts receivable and was charged a 5% factoring fee. What is the journal entry to record the transaction? Well, obviously we're going to need to know what 5% of 45,000 is to plug that into a journal entry. So how do we figure that? Same way, 45,000 times, in this case we're not necessarily concerned with the time period because this is just a flat 5% fee and not a 5% annual rate. So all we have to do is multiply 45,000 times 5%, and that gives us $2,250. Then we just plug it into this journal entry. We debit cash for the total amount of cash we expect to receive, I guess that we should have received on this deal, which is just the full 45,000 minus the 5% factoring expense, which just goes into debit factoring expense. Excuse me. And then, of course, we're going to credit accounts receivable for the full amount that was in there. Question 4. Wallace Company uses the allowance method for accounting for uncollectible accounts. On March 15th, Wallace Co. wrote off the $3,500 uncollectible account of its customer D. Davis. On May 16th, Wallace received a check out of the blue for the full amount of $3,500 from Davis, after it had already been written off. What entry would you use to write off the account on March 15th? Well, this is a bit of a red herring problem, and that again is when the wording or the question attempts to kind of either give you too much information or put something in there that's not necessarily relevant and that may lead you off to calculating something you shouldn't. In this case, all we care about is the entry that we would have made to write off the bad account. We get all this information about, okay, we got a check for the full amount. Well, okay, yeah, you did, but that happened several months after you wrote off the account, and we first need to write off the account, and that's what this question is asking us. So we just debit allowance for doubtful accounts for $3,500 and credit accounts receivable D. Davis for $3,500. And again, what this is basically doing is it is removing some of the allowance for doubtful accounts and removing the equal amount of account receivable. So this again would not change your net accounts receivable balance at all, because remember, the balance is overall accounts receivable minus allowance for doubtful accounts. Well, if you take something away from the allowance part, then you're subtracting less from your overall accounts receivable, but you're also taking that same amount away from the accounts receivable, so it balances out. Question number 5. On January 6th, Jackie makes a $50,000 120-day 8% loan to My Knee Company. What entry should Jackie use to record the transaction on January 6th? Okay, so again, this is the day of the loan, the day that this note receivable is recorded, and on that day, no interest, regardless of the rate, no interest has been accrued. So all we care about is what is the principal, in this case $50,000. So we're going to debit notes receivable for $50,000, and we're going to credit cash for $50,000. And more specifically, this question probably should read that Jackie makes a $50,000 cash loan to My Knee Company. But at any rate, we are assuming that since it wasn't written. But yes, debit notes receivable to record the fact that this entity now owes us money, and credit cash to show that we have loaned that principal amount of cash to My Knee Company. Okay, so this is the later part of this transaction. January 6th, we make the loan, the cash loan to My Knee. Then 120 days later, we want to record that this loan has come due and we've paid it off. So, first step, how much interest is going to be paid off here? 50,000 times 0.08, excuse me, times 120 divided by 360, which is 1/3. That gives us $1,333.33 of interest, which I'm just, for the sake of ease, going to round to $1,333. And a lot of times you'll see this type of stuff rounded to the nearest dollar. But that is not necessarily true. So it doesn't have to be rounded, but it's kind of a judgment call. Obviously, 33 cents is not a material amount to worry about. Once we have that, we need to do the journal entry. Okay, so first part, what are we getting out of this? What are we getting back when this is mature? We loaned $50,000 out, so we should get the $50,000 back plus the interest. So we're going to debit cash for $51,333. Then the interest shows up as interest revenue, credit $1,333, and then the full $50,000 note receivable is also a credit there, showing that they no longer owe us this money.